Hi guys and welcome to KeebWorks. Today I'll be reviewing the most popular brown clone switch, the Outemu Brown. Let's get started. Now I mentioned that because I see this switch in so many budget mechanical keyboards, especially ones that come from China, and a lot of them are in Amazon, so they're very easily accessible. These switches are tactile and they fall between the Cherry MX Brown and the Greetek Brown in terms of tactility, although they lean closer to the MX Brown switch. In fact, they're fairly similar to the TTC Gold V2 Brown that I looked at before, and that was a better than a Cherry MX Brown switch. Same goes for these. Now let's go over the switch internals, starting with the top housing. One thing to note here is that these switches use a 2-style locking design instead of the 4 that we usually see. Apart from that, it's a clear top housing. Next up is the bottom housing. Nothing special here, it's just your typical white housing. Until you look closely at the switch pins. Here are 3 pictures, and the one on the far right is the Outemu Brown switch. As you can see, the closest switch pin, or the one on the right, doesn't have any indentation on them. I have no idea why this is, but there you go. Now for the spring. And finally the stem, which is darker than both the Gatron and the Greetek Brown switch. Again, I have no idea why this is, but I thought I'd just mention that. Moving on to the force curves. In terms of similarity to the MX Browns, these Outemu Browns have a more apparent bump both in the up and downstroke, as you can see from this force curve comparison. Then again, both aren't great switches to begin with, so take that as you will. And as usual, the resources to these force curves will be in the description below, so be sure to check that if you're interested. Now, moving on to the categories. It's smoother than an MX Brown, which is to be expected at this point. It gets a 5 out of 10. On-center key press is a 6, but off-center key press are closer to a 4. So it's 5 on average. Weighting is average. The peak tactile force is 53 grams compared to the paltry 45 on the MX Brown. It also bottoms out closer to 60 grams instead of 55 on the MX Brown, though that's not as noticeable unless you bottom out every time, I suppose. 5 out of 10. Okay, I'm not sure why, but for acoustics they sound thockier compared to other Brown clones. It's still not great sounding, but I thought I'd mention it anyway. It gets a 5 out of 10. Now, for the typing demo. Enjoy. Now for typing performance. As a short summary, it's slightly better than the MX Brown because it's slightly more tactile. That's really it. It gets a 6 out of 10. For the long explanation, you can rewind towards the end of the overview in the beginning of this video, because that's exactly what I'm going to say here anyway. Gaming performance wasn't too bad. It's actually a tactile switch, so yes, when you're moving slowly in-game, you feel the bump. but as soon as you get into a heated firefight and you're double or triple tapping like crazy, it loses the bump. It's a 6 out of 10 for me, which is a good score for what it is. So, in conclusion, it's a small upgrade over the MX Brown and it shares similar traits to the TTC equivalent. So if you were looking to buy those and you can't anymore, this is basically the exact same thing, minus the design of course. The final score is 27 out of 50 or 54%. Here it is compared to other tactile switches I've looked at, and as you can see, it ties the TTC switch, but it gets beaten by the Greetech equivalent, which is slightly better. In the overall rankings, it's towards the bottom half of the pack. Anyway, next time I'll be reviewing my first clicky switch on this channel, finally. Until then, take care and goodbye.